Fredrik's been showing off this virtual reality at some of the events, and it's just truly amazing what he's built and how he's able to show the power of IGEL. And it's one of the coolest demos I've ever seen in my life. So I wanted to bring the guy on and have him share with you what he's built and how it works and things like that. And I always say I don't do a lot of VR, but if it shows as much of the power of what we can do as anything, any demo, anything you could ever do. If you could pull VR, you can pull anything, right, Fredrik?
Yeah, exactly. That's where I want to go. And I mean, this is one of the worst ways to actually talk about VR in a webinar, because you cannot show anything, you cannot do any videos, you cannot do it live. But I mean, you have been trying it on the different events where I've been showing it, and it's exactly as you say. It's all about showing what we can do with IGEL OS. It has, honestly, from my personal opinion, it has nothing to do with remote VR in terms of an IGEL employee, because I only want to show what we can do with the IGEL OS. But the remote VR thing it's amazing. It might certainly be a handful of use cases already, and the future is bright. So.
Yeah, the future is very bright for VR, and I sort of look at this stuff as, I see it as like a video game, right? But the future is anything but the video game for augmented reality and virtual reality. So
it's like video games is always powering the market. It starts with the gaming stuff, and then it turns mature and gets into enterprise. So.
Hey, let's get started. You and I will chat forever on this. So let me go ahead and welcome everyone to this IGEL community webinar. I'm very excited today to share with you, or to have Fredrik share with you something that he's called Remote VR and what have you. So I'm a little bit under the weather. I'm not going to talk for long. My brain isn't 100% there. Not that it usually is. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk real quick about the IGEL community. So let's do that real quick. So IGEL definitely loves community. We understand the power of you guys. We understand the power of the people that do the work each and every day, and we understand that they need resources. And what you guys are hungry for most is knowledge, is the information to do your jobs, and cool information like we're sharing with you today that gives you ideas and sets your one foot in the future, and also the power of sharing and communicating and being with each other, other like-minded folks. And when I talk to guys about the IGEL community, one of the things that I hear most often is, I love communicating with other guys doing the same thing as me. I'm learning so much from the other guys. Or I read a post that solved a problem that we were having, or gave me an idea to do something that we needed to do. And that right there is what the IGEL community was built for. It was built for you guys and for all of us to be a community and to be together. So that being said, we did it, and now it's growing like a weed. So the IGEL community, I think of it as not just a one area. You hear us talk a lot about Slack, and that's our messaging portal, and that's where the community sort of is happening. But there's a few other areas too. This is 1950 members. We're actually up to 2011. So very excited about that. A lot of folks in there. 26,000 messages have been posted in just a year and 4 months. Really impressive numbers there. But we also shared news with you in both publicly and privately. We built a public website to allow us to share resources that are more static resources. Within the community, we generate a lot of great content, or content's being shared by great folks. So we wanted a static place to put that, so you can go and say, hey, I want to see a list of the best white papers, or I knew that we posted one, or we saw one posted in the community. Where would I find that? Oh, here it is. Great. So we put that in igelcommunity.com, or we built igelcommunity.com. We have a page called /resources, which lists all of our key resources. Up there, we have white papers. We also wrote a bunch of get it started guides. So if you join this webinar and you're not a member of the IGEL community, or you've never tried IGEL before, but you should, and you want to, but you don't know how to get started, let's go to igelcommunity.com/guides and download the guide, and we'll walk you right through it, screenshot by screenshot and step by step. We're doing polls now within the IGEL community. I call them a 1-minute poll. We do them bi-monthly. And the idea there is just to ask you simple questions. Hey, which remoting platform are you using? Citrix, Microsoft, VMware, Amazon, what have you. And then we let that run, and then we share the results. And my goal is every twice a year to have a report come out, and then have a big one come out at the end of the year based on all the questions we asked. We also have alliance partners, and one thing you'll hear us talk about at IGEL is that we have this operating system called the IGEL OS, but really the operating system is comprised of tons of our partners, and this is really great information, or great. It's great that we have these guys, because then there's things like Fluendo, which makes our multimedia codecs so that we can provide you with the best user experience. And there's things like Lakeside Software and Liquidware, a Login VSI. All these clients and agents are built in. So we wanted to work with these alliance partners to share what they're doing with you guys. So we're doing a lot of webinars. They'll be posting some stuff within the community just to keep you up to date on what's new with them technically, always technically. We're a technical community. We're going to have a newspaper. About once a month, we're going to start sharing, what's going on within the community. What are our community members doing? So the community is more than just Slack. It's a sort of a 360 community, as I like to call it. So one more slide. If you're new to IGEL 2, or if you're old to IGEL but you're new to 2019 IGEL, please download the white paper I wrote on what's new in IGEL 2019. So if you're not a member of the IGEL community, please join. Hopefully I convinced you, although my brain is a little bit slow and my voice is a little bit forgotten. But with no further ado, I actually have one more slide. You can advance the slide. This is the last thing I want to talk about real quick before I turn it over to the amazing Fredrik, and that is we sort of came out with a new tagline. You might hear see us say, Next Gen Operating System, Edge OS. And I absolutely love this, and I wanted to just say a quick bit about this, even if my voice is shot. Because when I came to IGEL just 2.5 years ago, what I found was an operating system. And I said to myself and my friends and the people I work with and the customers and anyone I could, that we're not a thin client. We're an operating system. What these guys built, what the Germans built, is an operating system. And it's a operating system designed for the future, for today, for Citrix, for Microsoft, for VMware, for Google Cloud, be it on-prem or cloud. It's an operating system that's centrally managed in one location, that can be deployed anywhere, anyplace, anytime. It's the same story that Citrix has, but for the endpoint, and it's easier. There's no complexity. It's so powerful, and so I just wanted to say I absolutely love this tagline, because it hits the nail on the head. We're not a thin client. We're an operating system, and we're the next gen operating system for the future, for cloud. So be that on-prem or DaaS delivered. So that's as much as my voice and my brain will take. I'm going to turn it over to the really, really brilliant. And there he is right there, that lovely bug. Fredrik, are you ready, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Doug.
I can't wait to do this thing. Thank you so much. Let's go,
amazing. Buddy. Yeah. So welcome, guys, and hopefully ladies too. So Fredrik Brattstig. I'm based in Sweden, working more or less globally within IGEL, but mainly the Nordic market is my focus until now, at least. I have a few titles where I'm mainly working as a senior pre-sales engineer, and I'm also one of the NVIDIA Grid community advisors. for this year. You have my email address if there are any questions, or if you want to get in touch. You can also hit me at Twitter as Virtual Brat, or LinkedIn. Would be nice to have you. So let's get started. So IGEL OS and virtual reality, or virtual VR actually. So VR is of course a known thing in the market. Everybody, not everybody, but a few geeks at least are using VR. And let's get the story of IGEL OS and virtual VR got together. So first of all, what is virtual reality? Hopefully all of you have tried it because it's amazing. Virtual reality actually lets you emerge into whatever world you can think of. So what you see on the image is a screenshot from NVIDIA holodeck. So it's a collaboration tool that is developed by NVIDIA just to show collaboration functionality. So you can actually be multiple persons in a room using virtual reality. All the guys or the participants doesn't need to be in the same room, of course. They can remotely connect. But you can stand in this virtual room together and actually work on this car model that you see on the image. You can tear that car apart, you can draw on the car, you can write whatever notes, whatever you can imagine. The most amazing thing with virtual reality is that you actually get the feeling of being there. So when you put the headset on, you lose track of everything around you. So you only see the virtual world where you are at the moment, which is kind of a hassle, especially if you're on an event where somebody tries it that has never done VR before, because there are physical boundaries which you might not see. That's quite interesting to see newbies to actually try it. As you have seen movies, I guess, computers can create, of course, by the instructions of mankind, can create more or less any kind of world or environment, stuff that you can imagine, stuff that you can't imagine. I mean, look at Star Wars, for instance, or all of those videos. Everything is more or less computer created, and it takes you to a different world. This is the same, of course, with VR, because everything is computer aided, so to speak, and created, which means that especially with VR, you can be put into whatever kind of world that exists without even outside of your imaginations. So the thing is, it actually messes with your brain, because I mean, in the early days of VR, for the personal use, so to speak, it was one of the first things that came up was a roller coaster ride in VR, talking about the Oculus DK1, and if when you were standing and using this VR headset and going down the slopes and up the hills and whatever, a lot of people actually fall over because of it feels like you are moving, but you are standing still. So it totally messes with your brain. And of course, it closes out everything in the surroundings. So you're really stuck into this special world. As always, like we talked about earlier, it's driven by gaming, but professional VR is maturing and maturing enough. So on the bottom picture, you see actually a doctor that is aiding in surgery using VR headset. And that is kind of the ultimate edge, I would say, on professional VR. If it's that performant, that you actually can do assisting on surgery, then you are on a quite good path in doing this professional. So let's look at the history of remote VR, because there is actually history. The first time that I know of remote VR was in 2014. A friend of mine that is called Thomas Poppelgaard showed remote VR at Citrix Synergy from Orlando, connecting to a data center in Oslo. So it was a high latency link, and the headset was very low resolution, and the frame rate was quite low, which isn't to be compared with today's version of VR or remote VR, because the quality is so much higher, and also the frames, of course, frames per second. But anyways, quite amazing that they actually did this in 2014. During 2017, I think it's 2017, Citrix did virtual VR in their labs. So I have been seeing a few videos of their equipment, and this was actually without my knowledge when I started building the remote VR project, so to speak. But it's very interesting that they were already on this. Citrix was trying to combine everything into a carry-on computer, so to speak, with battery packs. So they were using Wi-Fi, which has some limitations, but let's talk more about that later on. So in 2018, at Citrix Synergy, me and Thomas Poppelgaard met because I was doing a race driving demo on IGEL endpoints, and having NVIDIA backend delivering 30 frames per second, full HD session. You were hooked up with a racing wheel and a racing seat, and yeah, we had a money machine raffle thing for the one performing the best lap time. Yeah, it was quite amazing, to be honest. We actually did this also this Citrix Synergy last week, 2 weeks ago, last week I think. Time flies. So anyways, me and Thomas met and decided to create the project, the Remote VR, together, and started discussing and trying to figure out how to get this going. So Thomas has been onto this Remote VR thing for a longer period of time, but due to his CTP status, he couldn't really share anything and couldn't really promote it, just try it out by himself, which is a shame. Anyways, so we started up by trying to gather contacts. So Thomas had some quite good contacts within Citrix, and he led me to a guy that is called Mohammed Dawood. There is a developer at Citrix. He was doing programming of the Citrix receiver for Linux for a few years. And Mohammed actually already set up the remote VR and gave me some quite good hints on where I should go together to get this going. We started up with a development meeting between Citrix and IGEL. So Mohammed and a few guys from IGEL decided to have a meeting to see if the components in the IGEL OS was good enough to actually do the remote VR. And it was more or less everything confirmed from Mohammed that the IGEL OS seems to be in good shape to actually do remote VR. But we figured out a missing link, and that's a VideoPow H.264 decoder. So the video stream decoder from the H.264 video stream. So Mohammed actually gave us the source code for the VDPOW decoder. We are using in IGEL OS a different decoder, but the VDPOW is performing better in terms of H.264 and NVIDIA backends. So it turned out actually that the IGEL OS is the perfect choice for remote VR. I will be talking about the remote VR setup that I've been traveling around and showing on different venues. It could be done definitely on IGEL OS 11, but for the demo setup, I'm using IGEL OS version 10, and the firmware is 10.05.500. I am using the Citrix Workspace app 1810, which could definitely be used using 1903 and probably in 1905 that is just released. We are using definitely hardware 264 acceleration, H.264 acceleration, to be able to decode the data stream from the backend in that amount of frames and resolution that we need to actually do remote VR in a good sense. So the VDPOW custom partition was created by the IGEL development team. When we got the source code for the H.264 decoder VDPOW, we decided to create a custom partition. And a custom partition is actually a piece of software which you can use in the UMS, the IGEL management console, can push to your endpoints to remotely modify the software stack on the endpoint. So it's a very good example of why to use custom partitions. The VDPOW is actually implemented in the IGEL firmware 10.05.630 and upcoming versions. I don't think it's actually got to the version 11 yet, but it's on its way. So you actually have a checkbox in the setup of IGEL if you are above 630 of firmware, where you can enable the VDPOW. We do need to use native USB redirection because you will have the headset is connected to the endpoint by using HDMI connection and USB. So all the tracking of the position of the headset and the handsets. So you have a headset where you have the image, and it's also contains trackers, and you have handsets which you hold in your hands, and there are trackers checking where in the space that both the hands and the head is, and in which angle and so on. And to get all this data transferred through the endpoint OS, so the IGEL device, back to the backend system where you actually do the rendering of the VR, we use native USB redirection. We have the possibility to do GPU power management to set the GPU to full throttle. Depends a bit on how the GPU is set up in terms of power management, but we'll get more to that at a later stage. So the impact of endpoint performance. It's very easy to see, let's say the thin client endpoint to be as downsized and cheap and whatever as possible. That's certainly okay in the general use case, but if you go for remote VR, there is certainly a need for performance also on the endpoint. So first of all, you need to have a GPU in the endpoint. This is for the H.264 decoding stream to be able to be unpacked and executed and to be shown on the headset display in the frames per second that is required to actually get this going in a good way. The endpoint also needs to have a CPU, of course, to handle everything that is not taken care of by the GPU. So you need to, something needs to actually run the receiver. Something needs to actually send the USB data to the backend and do all the networking stuff and whatever. So you will see actually that CPU usage on the backend, on the front end, is quite low. I have statistics later on. There is also a possibility in the IGEL OS to issue custom commands, which actually modifies the operating system while the system is booting. And with using custom commands, you can actually modify, for instance, in this case, the power management state of the graphics card, where you can do, insert values to the drivers, to be honest, and tell them to go full speed or reduce the speed, of course. But in our case, we want to go as fast as possible. And the question between Wi-Fi and LAN. So I have been using connected devices all the time, so LAN connected devices, because of the lower latency and the bandwidth. It should be possible to do this on a Wi-Fi connection, but in my case, I want to show the performance of the IGEL device or the IGEL OS, so I decided to go for LAN. But if you want to do this on Wi-Fi, make sure you have a really decent connection. So how to get it going and to reach the nirvana of remote VR. This is more of the backend setup. So I've been using the Zendesk 1809, where I use a Windows 10 backend with a Quadro P6000 graphics card. As I state here, this one is really overkill. It will certainly, in the resolution we need, do above 180, maybe 200 frames per second, which is not really needed. We need to get 89 frames to the endpoints. So I would say it should be enough to go with a cheaper Quadro card. Maybe some of you just now raise a question and think about why can't I use vGPUs like P40s from NVIDIA or something like that. The thing is, you need to have a driver on the host system that allows you to specify virtual resolutions, and the only one that I've seen this is actually the Quadro drivers, at this stage at least. So you need to be able to set a specific resolution in the Windows 10 session, where you are using 2160 x 1200, which is the resolution of the headset, and at 89 frames. The headset has a refresh rate of 89.5 frames, but 89 is perfect in terms of the display setup. Of course, you will need to have Steam VR or equivalent. So I'm using Steam as the VR enabler for the backend, because Steam VR is it's very easy to get it going. You just install Steam VR and then you have the framework to do VR. Then you need to, of course, purchase or download the different VR apps that you want to use. And the App Store in Steam is quite mature, I would say. So there is a lot of stuff to choose from. Honestly, not everything works in remote VR that will work if you're using local VR, but most of it actually works perfectly fine. And of course, we need to have the HTC Vive drivers installed on the NVIDIA backend, which is picked up by default from the Windows machine when you redirect the headset. but I anyways use the HTC Vive driver installation wizard to get all the drivers in place. And of course, enabling native USB redirection for all the devices. In terms of Citrix, there is a very easy setup. We'll see the policies in a later stage. But native USB redirection is used for everything that the headset is actually providing as information. There is a lot of data going through the USB protocol. I'm quite amazed that it actually works over a remoting session. So a lot of you guys that are familiar with HTX know that HTX is limited to 60 frames per second. That's actually not the case. There is a secret register hack that allows you to go up to 120 frames per second in HTX, so the Citrix ICA protocol. So the key is HK local machine, software, Citrix graphics, and you have a reg D word that is called max FPS and a value. Usually I actually set this to be 120. Even if I only need 89 frames on the endpoint, I usually set it to 120 because then it's up to the endpoint to take care of all the frames it needs and the backend system to push as many frames as possible through the ICA protocol. It actually doesn't get choked, which you might think. Let's say if the front end is 89 frames per second, set the backend to 89 frames per second. I would agree that would be more sane to actually do this, but there are always a few frame drops when you go at this high rate. So if you set 89 frames on the backend, you will end up at hitting the front end with about 86, 87 frames, which actually adds some lag, some distortion, and the tracking isn't perfect. So I set it to 120 frames per second. It works fine with 95 frames and upwards. But as I have a Quadro P6000 card, it doesn't matter for me. So USB priority is also a thing to consider because the amount of data that is sent through the USB protocol, I mean, imagine you have 2 trackers, you have 2 handsets, you have a headset. All the movement, when you move your hands, when you move your head, when you turn around, all of this data needs to be sent over one USB port through the network, first USB to the endpoint, then from the endpoint through the network to the backend, and taken care of by the VDA agent and pushed to the operating system so that the operating system knows what the VR driver should do about the information. That is a lot of data. So there is a USB priority function in the ICA protocol. At my blog, virtualbrat.wordpress.com, there I have a download section actually with a USB priority reg files, which might come in handy in other cases too. But it's there is no meaning of showing the reg file in this scenario because it's just I'll get it. Just it's a good file to download and just add to your environment. And of course, there are a few Citrix policies needed where there is a few actually shown on the screen where the important ones are client USB redirection, optimize for 3D graphic workloads, session reliability, turn off, use hardware encoding for video codec, and use video codec for compression entire screen are the important ones. With those 5 different policies on the back end, you are good to go. So in terms of VR headsets, what I'm using is the HTC Vive headset. It has a resolution of 2160 times 1200 pixels. It has a refresh rate of 89.5 hertz. And it communicates on USB 2.0, which is in this case a quite good benefit. To be honest, I haven't tested any other headsets, but due to rumors, I haven't focused on anything else than the HTC, because a lot of the other headsets out there in the market are sending too much data through the USB protocol, so it's very difficult to handle for the backend. I mean, the RemoteVR in Citrix is not a supported function by Citrix. There is no reason for them to make this possible for any kind of headset. If they do this as a product in the future, if they release a RemoteVR ICA product, then of course it might make sense to try to get different headsets to actually function well. It might be possible to actually do it, but I haven't tested any more than the HTC Vive, and the HTC Vive is working perfectly fine. And that's the why, just because it gives the data in the correct way to the backend system, and it's quite easy to set up. There is though a difficulty. You see the 2 squares on the back end, which are the trackers. Those needs to be mounted on a wall or on a stand or something above the head of the one doing the VR, which makes it a bit complicated when you are in an open space. If you are in an office space or a room, then it's definitely easy to put those on the walls or wherever you want to. So in terms of endpoint statistics, this is where the a bit more geeky thing comes out. I have a statistic outcome from a RemoteVR session. We see on column number 3, we see the frames per second, and you see that it's quite stable, 88, 89 frames per second. If you achieve this frames per second, you will have a perfectly smooth running VR experience with no lag at all. You will not have any nausea at all. Everything will be just as if you're using a regular VR headset connected to a PC. In column number 5, you see the kilobytes per second. So the transfer rate that is used by the ICA protocol. It peaks at about 6.3 megabytes per second, which is about 50 megabits per second of network traffic. So to be honest, we are using 89 frames per second, and we are using a quite high resolution. So I would say 50 megabits per second is acceptable. So on the demo that I bring to fairs, I use a regular 5-port gigabit switch, which is definitely more overpowered than is needed. You see on column number 24, the total CPU usage is about between 6 and 9%, This means that the endpoint that I'm using in this case is certainly capable enough to do all the decompression or decoding of the H.264 stream using the GPU on the device. Otherwise, you would see a CPU usage above 100% all the time. And on column number 35, you see the screen response time is stable at 17 milliseconds, and that's about what you need to achieve to get the remote VR experience to work well. I haven't tried this over WAN connections, shrinked connections with high latency. It would be interesting to do a test of how low bandwidth and how high latency you can actually go and get this going in a good way anyways. But stay tuned and keep an eye on my blog for that information, future work. So the key points of remote VR for IGEL OS. So IGEL OS is the first production-ready OS for remote virtual reality, which means that you can just set up an IGEL OS device, enable a few parameters like H.264 hardware decoding, using deep compression codec. Of course, you need to do the native USB redirection. You need to enable the VDPOW routines in the device, and you need to point at the Citrix environment. That's all you need to do on the endpoint. I'm using Intel NUC Skull on the demos because it's way overpowered, so it gives a very good experience when doing a fair. I was using the UDP on the NUC Skull. I could definitely install the UDC or IGEL OS 11 locally. But you can actually use the UD7, the IGEL hardware device, but you need the add-on graphics card that it gives you the fourth display port, because that one has a dedicated frame buffer for the GPU, which allows faster processing of the data stream. IGEL OS 11 and IGEL OS 12, IGEL OS 11 and IGEL OS 10 is definitely targets for this platform. What are the benefits? I have never said anything about the benefits of using remote VR. If you are using a VR station, you will have a really powerful PC where you have a VR headset connected, and this device will mainly just be used as VR PC, and those are generally very expensive. So here you have the possibility to actually move the GPU computing power to the data center using the IGEL OS as the endpoint, which means that you can have a so to speak, thin client device on the edge and actually share this GPU power between different departments, between different offices, between different cities, maybe even between different countries. All is depending, of course, on the latency and the data transfer. But it's certainly possible to share the GPU power at least without moving this heavy, expensive PC around. So. Yeah, already said that. Already said that one too. So just to be really remote. And the nice thing is that it's actually the whole stack is general available software. Already when we did this the first time in Disrupt in Munich in January, we were the first one out to the market showing that this is possible. Everything is built on generally available software. So the VDPOW is now included in the IGEL OS. The Citrix VDA agent is factory standard, so there is no specialty versions or whatever. The only thing is the register key to enable the above 60 frames per second on the Citrix side, and some optimizations, of course. So starting to wrap up actually, so I would send out a few very special thanks to, first of all, Mohammed Dawood. He's one of the biggest brains I ever met, and developers at Citrix, and he was giving me all the key components to what I needed to actually get this going. He is certainly a mastermind in terms of Citrix and receiver for Linux. Second one, of course, Mr. Thomas Poppelgaard. I hope you know him. If you don't, try to get on a few of his presentations. He's flying around the world and doing presentations on mainly vGPU and also virtual reality. He has a lot of skills in terms of virtual reality since the start of virtual reality, more or less, and also good knowledge about NVIDIA and AMD GPUs for data centers and endpoints. Third one out is Roberto Moreno. He's the PM at Citrix for HDX 3D Pro. He was the person allowing me to share the secret max FPS registry value. Without his information or this information, it wouldn't make sense to have to actually do any promoting of the remote VR, because then it would be useless, because nobody will be able to actually get there. And the team at NVIDIA, John Fanelli, Jared Cowart, and Joanne Clark, thank you guys for sponsoring of crazy powerful GPUs. It has been a very good use for me. And I enjoy working with those GPUs. They're amazing. Thanks IGEL management for believing in me, and because the idea of running virtual reality through Citrix on IGEL OS, it's kind of crazy, right? But I convinced them, and they trusted me and let me do this on work hours and off hours, of course. They allowed me to be dizzy in the evenings and feel nausea about bad VR experiences. But finally, when you hit the vein, it's amazing when you actually get the 89 stable frames per second and everything is perfectly smooth. It's crazy. And of course, for agile development, supporting and engaging in this project to create the remote VR functionality in IGEL OS. So with that, I would like to say thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, we can have a short question round, or either you direct the questions to me personal by email address, and you can read more about what I'm doing in terms of advanced graphics and IGEL OS at my blog at virtualbrat.wordpress.com. Thank you so much.
Fredrik, that was absolutely wonderful. I couldn't have asked for more. You know, you prefaced it by saying it's a little bit difficult to show remote VR in the form of a two-dimensional webinar. Yeah. But I think you did, you know, short of showing it, which is, as you said, impossible. You did a perfect job. That was absolutely everything I wanted, a little bit more. So, guys listening, I see a bunch of you out there. So, if you have any questions, please use the questions piece to go to webinar. Let's see what we can come up with to ask Fredrik. If you don't have any questions, we can call it a webinar. Definitely reach out to Fredrik. Follow him on Twitter too, if you guys are. Well, he put it up there. No, Twitter's not. What's your Twitter handle, buddy?
Virtual Brat. I had it on the. Let's see. Sorry,
you'll find it.
Backwards.
So please use the questions piece, or just let us know what you think. If the last thing I want to say too is, please let us know if you have any ideas for any upcoming webinars. We've been doing a bunch with the ISVs because that's the power of the IGEL OS is the different components we have in there. But we also want to do technical webinars like this one. So if you have any ideas of things you would like to learn, anything, something you're passionate about, you would like to share, if you'd like to do a webinar with me, please let me know. Brown@igel.com, and I would love to work with you. Fredrik, I don't see any questions coming in. I think you stumped them all, or you probably got their brain. They're probably out on eBay right now, or Amazon, buying everything they need.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. I did this demo in Munich in January, and it was the first time I ever tried on a virtual reality headset of any sort other than a Google Cardboard, which is far short of anything cool. I was so impressed. It was incredible. After a while, I had to take off the headset because I was starting to get dizzy. And as Fredrik said, you can fool the brain into thinking that you're in a world that you're not, and that's what's amazing about the brain.
If you never tried it, you will feel dizzy for the first few sessions, even if everything is running perfectly smooth, because I mean it's a different way for the brain to actually, it picks up so many different instructions in terms of movement and whatever. So yeah,
the brain doesn't understand reality. That sounds weird, but it doesn't. You can fake it. So for example, if you think to yourself, imagine sand pouring through your hand, truly imagine it. Don't think of me telling you to imagine it, but really think about it. You can feel it. Imagine the cold, imagine hot, and you can feel this. Imagine eating ice cream. And they talk about this when people are like, kidnapped or in prison or in POW camps or something. They can truly put themselves in a world if they imagine it. Then of course they're slapped back into reality. But you can confuse, you can fool your brain, and virtual reality will take you in there with all the senses, and then your brain will do the rest. And before long, you're in that world. It's remarkable, and the business use cases are coming out. One guy wrote in the chat window, it would be a great use for virtual health checks, and I replied back, yeah, I need one about right now. So, but yeah, it's really fascinating what you can do with it. Fredrik, thank you so much for doing this, for taking the time to sharing this info with us. So
yeah, thank you for letting me do it. Amazing.
Truly my pleasure. So if somebody wants to, well, there it is. If they need to keep up with you, it's up on the screen. So guys, let's call this a webinar. I don't need to be rambling. And Fredrik, I'll let you go on with your day. It's late in Europe. So
sure.
Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you for Fredrik for presenting and sharing this information and all that you do.
Thank you.